And we're on. Karsten Jensen, thanks for being on Fitness and Consciousness.
Well, thank you for having me, Ryan. I look forward to it.
Yeah, you just kind of found out about you somewhat recently, and it looks like you've been working with a lot of high-level athletes.
I have,
And
yeah.
yeah, so I guess just let's get into that. What kind of athletes are you working with, and what are you doing for them?
The athletes I've been working with over like since 1993 overall covers 27 different sports. So the most physical I've been involved with is the martial arts, wrestling and jiu-jitsu with one girl that I worked with in the early 2000s while I lived in Denmark. She's a double world champion at that time. One guy I worked with in wrestling, so two-time silver medalist before I started working with him, and did really well while we worked. And he won silver in Rio as well, and now into MMA. At the other end of the spectrum, a little bit earlier, I worked with international level figure skating in the Danish sports system. So generally, in a really short way of saying what I do with them, is I ask them and their coaches, what's your limiting factor for practice and competing? And then they will typically say one of seven things. One of them being, I would like to be able to train more with quality without getting injured. And then I design a super individualized training program for them. So that's really the core of what we do, a program that fits for one person and not another person. Does it make
And
sense overall? Yeah.
yeah, and so like with say the I don't really know anything about figure skating. I've watched some of it, and it is amazing
Yeah.
what they can do. The flying and the spinning around, and but
Yes.
the martial arts stuff I definitely identify with. I've been doing that since I was a little kid. But so, what is there like a recurring theme? You like see like it's a program for one person and not another. But is there a recurring thing like it's like you're working with like the wrestlers or the jujitsu guys or whatever it is? Is there something like a common theme, a common mistake? They do too much of this and not enough of that, or
No, I actually think that the best answer to that question is that in order to make the individualized training programs, I don't look for recurring themes, because then you can tend to reproduce what you did with another person
mm,
with this new person. So one of the best ways that I've ever, or this is where I learned it originally from Charles Staley, and you may be familiar with him, a coach from the States.
yeah.
He said you come from like a blank slate, clean slate, empty your cup. So when I start with a new athlete and a new sport, I make a needs analysis, which is basically just to ask the question, what does it take physically to dominate the environment? And then, I have a protocol for analyzing that biomechanically. And then you end up with, these are the exercises that are most likely to transfer to the sport performance. These are the most common injury sites. This is the need for flexibility. And that becomes really the start of designing a program for that sport. After that, you look at the individual goals, the individual assessments, and then you look at how does these individual needs fit into what the requirements of the sport is. So one of the best examples or easiest example is for basketball. In basketball, you need to jump. However, somebody may already have the jumping ability needed to compete at the level that they want to compete at. So that even though jumping is needed in basketball, for this particular person, jumping is not a priority. So they may just, let's say they squat not to get knee injury and just to maintain their leg strength. They don't squat to jump higher. And that's the difference between a sport-specific and an individualized training program.
So
That's overall. No, go ahead.
so with the example of the squat, so I would imagine if you're working on someone's uh, trying to jump higher, then maybe you're going to be doing more explosive squats. So maybe I can squat. Uh, Maybe I would put like a third of my one rep max or something like that on the bar and just like do jumping squats or something like that, because I want to be able to jump higher. But if I'm working on my like stability, injury prevention stuff, maybe I would do, I'm not trying to like fill the percentages in for you, but like maybe I'm doing like more like 75, 80% and going slow. Is that the kind of difference you're talking about, or what would you do?
Well, as far as using squats to improve a jump, it was actually what I did my master thesis on, and that's like in 1999, so it's a while ago. One of the key findings from looking at the studies that were available at that time was you can improve your jump by improving your squat until about the point where your back squat to parallel is about 1.7 times your body weight. And there's not even a distinction whether you try to accelerate the weight. Generally, however, not those exact studies, but other studies show that if you attempt to accelerate, the transfer to dynamic performance is larger. But this is with heavy weights. So even if and the studies all go like this, some people will come in and they will have that jump tested. They will squat for X amount of weeks with a certain protocol. They won't jump typically, but then they will jump again at the end of that protocol. And within that range of squat strengths, typically the jump will go up. Then there's a point where your jump will no longer go up just by squatting. You actually have to jump also potentially with lower loads, like you say, which are the loads that optimize mechanical power. But you don't have to do that in order to get a transfer from squats to jumping. One of the things I learned from a master thesis is distinction between neural activation and neural control. That's an incredibly important distinction for anybody trying to lift weights to move better. Because what lifting weights mostly does is you take a movement that kind of sort of resembles what you want to do. It doesn't have to be that exact movement. And then when you lift heavy weights, you improve neural activation. And what that means is you got to keep in mind here that the muscles consists of motor units. You're familiar with that term?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like the motor nerves and all the fibers that it innervates. And there could be hundreds in a given muscle, like the gluteus maximus, for example. When you lift heavy weights, what you get better at, you can activate more of the motor units that you have at a higher frequency and sometimes in a more coordinated way. Not necessarily totally specific to jumping. So one of the things that is missing from a squat in relation to jumping is the plantar flexion coming onto your toes. So that's why it's the best improvement in jumping come from combining squatting and jumping. And that's how it often happens in the real world. Somebody practices basketball and then they also do squats at the same time. So there's a natural integration and transfer from the lifting into the moving.
Yeah.
Does that make sense overall?
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
So if somebody has the 1.7 times body weight, and maybe that's really difficult for them, so it doesn't happen very fast, but they're trying to go fast.
That's the key.
They're trying to accelerate, but to the observer, they're not going fast. It doesn't look explosive.
No.
So does that carry over also? Just the fact that they're trying to accelerate.
It's the intention that matters. Yeah. And as a strength coach, if any of the listeners are strength coaches, even if the weight moves slowly, you can see the way the muscles catch on. So you can see that the muscles contract quickly in the beginning of the ascent of the squat. So you can actually see the intention to accelerate even though the weight don't actually move fast.
Yeah, that does make sense. And then like when you don't have the bar and you use that same intention, then you just kind of like fly. It kind of just reminded me of like for punching, some people will hold dumbbells.
Yeah.
And then some people say that actually doesn't help you punch faster, but it might make you feel like you punch faster, but it doesn't really. Like, do you get into like that at all when you're working with the martial artists? Are you like holding weights in the hands for?
Yeah. The number one thing that relates to that, whether that makes sense in terms of punching faster, is when you're looking for carryover between training exercises and a sporting movement. One of the things you want to look at, what's the direction of the force that needs to be produced? And if you want to punch someone, it basically means it comes from the ground. You push into the ground, down and backwards, and then you rotate your hips and the trunk, and that's expressed through the hand. And the hand is moving horizontally. The momentum, as you would say, mass times velocity, is horizontal. Basically, what that means, if you're going to get better at that, you have to work against horizontal resistance. That's the most direct way of improving the punch. And the king of exercises for that, I learned in part of my training, being a standing cable push. So you use a cable machine, you set the pulley approximately at your chest height, a little bit depending on what type of punch you want to practice, and then it's almost like a punch. Whereas what holding dumbbells might do, and I've seen this argument in articles made by boxing coaches, it gives you the ability to not, the endurance to not drop your hands. That's what it does. It doesn't per se teach you to punch faster.
Yeah, I can see like maybe it would help like with uppercut or something like that. Maybe dumbbells do that.
Yeah.
And you see
something like that.
I've seen like Mike Tyson using some, I don't know what they weighed, but maybe they were like 30 pounds or something. That's just a guess. And so, I mean, I don't know who punches harder than him, but but that doesn't mean that that's why he was punching hard.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
And with like the cable machines, so like something that I've been like kind of like digging into my mind about is and using the cable and having sport specific, quote unquote, for like martial arts and using like the cable. So like cable rows.
Yeah.
And like at about chest height. So I'm thinking, okay, if you want to work on your balance, if you go to a judo class or you're at my jiu-jitsu class had a lot of throws and judo class, you're not standing on something wobbly. You're on the mat, maybe it squishes a little bit, but that's whatever. But people are like pulling your arm. People are pushing you and pulling you. And so the cable, if you set the cable up and you have good posture and you're working explosively that way and you keep your head over your hips, and then maybe that works your balance. So in the cable row, I'm not thinking I'm going to work my lats and do this cable row. I'm going to work my balance with this cable row. So my lats are working. Yeah, my grip. But so what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you, or?
That makes sense, and part of the research on balance training shows that it is specific, which means that the consensus, as far as I'm informed, is that there's no particular transfer from having good balance on something wobbly, like you say, to having good balance on something that's not as wobbly. So as a thought that came into my mind as when you gave that example was that to being balanced when someone tries to throw you, as far as a needs analysis, that is an open environment. So something else that affects you. And let's say you want to use a cable pull for that. Then a thought, and if you have an opportunity, I would love to hear what it works, because I never tried like that. You set up for the cable row, and then you basically go into the end position of the row, and there's tension on the cable. Now you close your eyes, and you have a partner basically hold the cable, so you just touch it, and your eyes are closed, and then at some point, the partner's going to let go of the cable, so the cable is going to yank you, and unless you absorb that and react to that really quickly, you're going to fall.
I like that. That's cool.
That would seem specific to me.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's really cool. That makes sense, because The judo, it's a surprise because you get tricked. Everybody knows the throws,
Yes.
and so it's not, but it's that surprise. You think they're doing one thing because if you know what throw is coming, unless you're way outmatched, it's not that hard to block it.
No.
But yeah, I like that idea a lot. That's really cool.
Thank
Then
you.
you have to, that reaction time of, because things in a real match, things are happening at that split second level, and
The
it's
second, yeah.
that's really cool.
I'd like to say one quick thing about sport-specific training, because that's something that, to the best of my knowledge, a lot of strength coaches particularly are not well informed about. A lot of people seem to think that if I want a sport-specific training as far as, let's say, tennis, martial arts, we say, yeah, do sport-specific training, go out and play tennis with a 10-kilo racket and see how that goes. And with that, they're also saying that as far as strength and conditioning, you can't do sport-specific training. You can only do general training. Now, what does general training mean? Does it mean you can just randomly pick exercises and then hope that there's some form of transfer to the exercise? Absolutely not, because we realize that good strength and conditioning for any sport would mean that any exercise that a coach ever give to that athlete or client in the short or the long run will improve that person's ability to practice and compete. And what that means is that all strength and conditioning must be specific to the needs of the person and the sport. Otherwise, it's literally a waste of time. And that's really what sport-specific training means, specific to the needs of the person and the sport. And the place I'm aware where it said the best is in a book called Super Training. You should stimulate, not simulate. So whatever we do in the weight room should stimulate the ability to do martial arts, tennis, basketball. It does not necessarily have to simulate. Sometimes stimulating and simulating is the same. Sometimes the thing you need to do to stimulate does not simulate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do have super training, and it is super boring.
Yeah.
It's so hard for me to get through it. I've had it for years. And I know it's excellent, and I know I'm certified through Strong First. So, like the way Pavel Tsatsouline writes, it's real easy for me to read because his sense of humor resonates with me, and he writes it out simply. Complex ideas made plain and simple. But man, I've had a real hard time getting through Super Training. I've read most of it, but man, that's a tough. Maybe it's not tough for everybody. Maybe it's just my thinking, but it's a tough read for me.
I think you're right. It is a tough read. Basically, anybody I've ever talked to who has read it has the same feeling, me included. And the way that I think I've had it for 12 years, I haven't read it cover to cover. The way I've done it is, if I was interested in a topic, I might look in that book to see what was covered, and then read the sections that pertain to that topic.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to think about it, because it has a lot of good information, a lot of excellent explanation, like P and F, and like it has like a whole different level of that than what I ever knew about before that book. And I'm with you on the sport specific thing, like how specific can you be? That's why, like when I was talking about the cable row, I said quote unquote sport specific, because it's not the same, but I can see how your idea of having somebody just drop the weight and it's a surprise makes it more sport specific. And something else I was kind of like thinking about is I'm like trying to figure out like what like to help people in like martial artists, like mindset and or skills that are like sport specific. So like just a simple like barbell like clean and press.
Yeah.
And my thinking was, so like a lot of times in like when we're grappling, we need to do like two things. There has to be like a rhythm. So it's like for an escape from like some like hold on the ground, like maybe you bridge and then you turn, or something like that, or there's all kinds of variations of that. But that has to be like a timing thing, and you have to be fast, or the correct timing, to keep from getting that reversal stuffed. And so I just, like on a simple clean and press, if I do the clean and then I pause at my shoulders, and then I wait for a couple seconds and then I press, is okay. So yeah, I'm still going to get a lot stronger. But if I just clean and I use that knee bend, that dip, and then I just use that dip, and then when I straighten my legs, use that to use as a push press, even though, unless I'm actually picking somebody up and like throwing them out of the ring like WWF, it's not sport specific. But is it specific in a way that it's like I use that timing, like in like, so I think of like martial arts is sometimes you have to do stuff before you're ready. If you have to if you're fighting somebody that's pushing the pace, you don't like this pace, but you don't have a choice because you're in this. So sometimes you have to do things before you're ready and stuff like the. If you're familiar with, are you familiar with Strong First, Pavel Satsulan? And
I am. I attended one of Pavel's courses way back. We're sometimes in email contact.
Oh, cool.
We live like a research things. I have a very good impression of him too.
Yeah, he's and so like the snatch test. So doing 100 snatches in 5 minutes with 53 pounds. If you're not always ready, but you only have 5 minutes. And I saw somebody fail with 99.
Yeah.
So you have to do it before you're ready. So kind of like my thinking, and I know it's maybe getting a little bit esoteric, but is that more like mentally sport specific or energy system sport specific to do the clean and press without a pause?
Yeah.
I
think I hear different elements of your question. The one is basically if there could be a transfer of the sense of rhythm from one movement to another movement. And I believe there could, even though I don't think it's the most obvious thing. I would try to accomplish the same thing with movements that are more likely to stimulate what's needed in martial arts, because martial arts is not up and down, right? It's more horizontal at angles. I do think there's a transfer, but I don't think it would be the most transferable exercise. I think that's one. Second thing, in terms of being ready, a huge part of developing strength endurance and power endurance, and this is part of a needs analysis as well, is the requirement for continuous strength endurance, like in a snatch test, same movement over and over again, or discrete power endurance. It means you do one thing and then maybe you fight a little bit for position and you have to throw again, or then you get down and you try to hold it and you have to get out. And as far as stimulating performance, that's one of the things I would be looking for. Are we looking for something continuous or discrete? So I don't, you could have like a very long set of snatches as part of prep for martial arts, but I would more go along the lines of a circuit that incorporates different, sports stimulating movements and beginning the next exercise before wanting to.
Yeah.
But it also brings up an important component of strength and conditioning is that some of the things that are needed in the competition, that's clearly in the sports training, things like, practicing your technique. Other things are more clearly in strength and conditioning, like lifting weights. Some things could be a little bit in between. So, for example, I think any coach athlete could make the decision is that the element of starting before I'm mentally ready, do we want to have that in the sports training or do we want to have that in the strength and conditioning? And this again would relate to like an open environment. You can say being forced to go sooner than you want. It may, for example, be, let's say it's a group setting. And, the coach says, okay, today you have 30-second breaks, and people in the warm-up, you're going to tell them you have 30-second breaks, and they know that it's going to be really hard. They might even get you puke. And when they start, they're going to say, oh, by the way, you have 15-second breaks.
Mm.
So they have to react to something that more mentally challenging that they anticipated. Because that's a huge thing in all, that's really the idea of all training, is to make the training harder than the competition. So that you can say there are two levels in it. One of the purposes of strength and conditioning is to make the sports training easier. And part of the sports training is to make the matches easier.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as I'm like trying to like push my own thinking and training and seeing just like how it works, and it's kind of like dipping into like the more obscure ideas of how like the clean and press, even though we're probably not going to actually clean and press our opponent, although you might, but how could something like that be transfer? And maybe I'll hit dead ends like, okay, that's actually I'm just wrong about that. I'm okay with that too. I'm like trying to like push my thinking, and if I'm wrong, fine. I'll figure out something that's better after that, because it seems like nowadays there's so much information out there. There's so many people are getting so good, and they're so athletic, and so I'm like looking like, well, what's next? And I'm not trying to like reinvent the wheel.
No.
But what's just kind of different ways of like looking at something. And
so with respect to the clean and press, for example, let's say you're pushing someone from a standing position, or he tries to push you over, you try to resist with your hands, and you can say it's the same muscle groups you'll be using there, meaning your legs in a pushing movement and your arms in a pushing movement to resist, as you would use in a clean and press. So you definitely expect some transfer. So there's things that are similar, but there are also things that are not similar, and that would be the direction of the resistance, meaning that you'd have to angle your body differently. You're probably going to have to engage your abdominal muscles differently, and your shoulder flexors, your chest, your triceps differently. That's why things like prowler are more in biomechanical alignment, what's requirement in martial arts.
Prowler?
A prowler.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by that.
So that's kind of like a sled with some uprights on, and you push it like if you were to push a car.
We have those.
I was figuring. Yeah. And I want to say one thing more. In terms of sports specific programs, one of the things that, and I'll use a phrase I don't typically use in professional conversations. It irritates me almost to the point it pisses me off that some people will say they have a sports specific program, and then I ask them, so what do you do? So I do bench presses, squats, and bend over rows. And my first thought is, so what sport is that for? It could be for all kinds of sports. It has transfer to most movements. So squats has transfers to jumping, to first step quickness. But to me, it seems like that person who has given that athlete that sport-specific program really hasn't done the work to truly analyze the needs of that sport, and done the work to put in basically a signature exercise that would tell someone that this is clearly a program for judo and not a program for squash or figure skating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And honestly, going just a little bit of a rant and then I'll stop. I almost think it's being misinformed or lazy, because that information has been available for decades. For some reason, some people just haven't picked it up yet. And it's not stuff I'm making up. It's basic biomechanics. I've just been fortunate enough to be exposed to it early in my career, partly challenged because I worked with so many sports as I have, and for having a very favorable job description, which allowed me to spend a lot of time on each athlete's program. So for example, when I worked in the Danish sports system, I had the responsibility for about 20 athletes in a full-time job. So that to me was very favorable. I also worked overtime, but it was still very favorable. I know in contrast, some university coaches here in Canada where I am, they're responsible for 11 teams, which might be 140 athletes. And I totally understand you can't go into the same depth if you're responsible for that amount of athletes.
Yeah.
Your growth as a coach just suffer from it a little bit.
Yeah, because then you're looking for more, like you were saying from the beginning, like I asked about recurring themes, and you avoid thinking like that.
Yeah.
But if you're working with that many people, 11 teams or whatever, you kind of can't help but generalize because you don't have time to be that
specific.
And like something else, like with the sport specific, quote unquote, like for martial arts that I was thinking of is, it's like the cable row, but also like maybe starting off, like you're pulling it towards you, and then people just like listening, like, so when you pull the cable in, like turning tight, and then end up being kind of like a punch. So it starts off with a pull, and then I pivot. So my toes are pointing. Start out with my toes are pointing towards the cable.
Yeah.
And I do my pull, and then I pivot. So then my toes are pointing away from the cable, and I make it like a push. And I'm thinking like, okay, that it's not going to be exactly like a throw, but it resembles a lot of throws, like Tayotosh, and there's Ochimata, and a bunch of throws. It kind of like resembles a bunch of throws, but not. That's why I like keep saying like quote unquote sport specific, and like So you think like more like something like that would be more transferable than like the clean and press and.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really based on what I've done, no doubt in my mind. And what you described there is often executed as a cable wood chop that has that element.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can say taking it sometimes if available, taking it one step further is you consider what type of attachments you use. So far we've spoken about really like a D handle, that's a regular cylindrical shaped handle. So one thing I would attempt to do, but haven't tried in this particular context, is what are you grabbing? You're like bear hogging someone to throw them? Are you grabbing their jacket, or what are you doing?
I was thought about it like in both ways. So I've done some stuff with like the heavy bag. So like have a heavy bag off the chain, just off, and maybe get it in some kind of like body lock or choke.
Yeah.
And then I'm like squeezing the bag and then doing squats with it. So I'm working my like squeeze endurance, because I think, well, how do you work your squeeze?
Yeah.
When you're not actually working with a person.
Yeah.
And then so that's like kind of like, of course you're working your legs, but if you have 100-pound heavy bag, it's not like a big deal to be squatting that.
No.
But it's still working like,
yeah,
it resembles a throw, but you're working your squeeze more. And
so what I was hinting at there is you take that bag, and if you connect to someone who's good at sewing, and you sew a little ring on the bag, and then you attach the bag to the cable. So now you basically, you lift the bag and you squeeze it, and you have to hold it and move it and lift the weight stack.
I like that idea. That's cool.
Thank you.
In what way would you be lifting it? Like what would you?
You would squeeze it the way you just described. So you hold it in the same way you'd hold the opponent. So you have to get it off the ground. So you have to hold it, the 45 pounds or whatever, and move that while you squeeze it and lifting the weight stack.
So you just pick it up and then pivot around.
Yeah, pivot around. Do the wood chop motion. Do the wood chop motion. I've done that with the wrestler I mentioned earlier. He did that, picking it up from the ground. We had it 160 to 80 pound sandbags, so they were as heavy as his opponents. So, and that worked extremely well for him.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. So just like attach the heavy bag to like a low cable.
Yes.
And then so when you pick the bag up, you're picking up the bag plus the cable, and then you can pivot, and it has that resistance, more of the horizontal resistance as you're turning it or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. What, like, how did you like get into like working with the athletes in this way? Like, what was your like background? Like, what was your start in the fitness world? It sounds like you're. I mean, I've been at this for a long time, and
Yeah.
I'm. I don't think I think I'm pretty good. I mean, but I'm not easily impressed. But I can tell just by talking with you right away that you have like a lot of like real experience. And I know you've worked with like Olympic athletes and stuff, right? And
Yes.
so that's, of course, that's impressive. But just like these few ideas, I can tell that you think differently. You have
Thank you.
something like different, and it's really good. So, how did you get where you are? I guess.
Well, very, very long story. My first strength coach job was with triathletes. There was a buddy of mine from university. He became the chairman in a triathlon club in Copenhagen, so the capital of Denmark. And he asked if we were studying exercise physiology at the time, and he know I had become interested in strength and conditioning during our second year doing track and field, where I was a really slow runner. And I wanted to do sprinting, so I started to wonder, how do you make a tortoise into a hare, or at least a faster tortoise? That was kind of my initial interest. And then I got this coaching job for triathletes, where some of them were world class, and a couple of them took medals in the world championships in the years I worked in the club. And I worked with international level figure skating, national level volleyball, also while I was still in university. And then I got hired by the Danish sports system. So I think in terms of, you can say, thinking patterns, I learned about biomechanics and needs analysis in university. And then in my nature is very analytical, and I was fortunate enough to go on a path of asking the right questions, and then, having time to ask the questions as we spoke about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like with the Danish, there was I don't know if it goes back like 100 years or something like, but like the Danish gymnastics stuff, like the Danish stuff that might have been similar to. I'm trying to get my thoughts together, but like maybe something similar to. Like a lot of what looks like yoga today. Like if you go to a yoga class, in the West, in America today, and you see them doing these
the warrior pose, for example.
What's that?
Warrior pose, for example.
Yeah. And it seems like the origin of some of these isn't like necessarily ancient India.
No.
But it's like Danish gymnastics, and maybe there's like some like European stuff like as we would say like in America, like Eugene Sandow or Evgeny Sandow, however like the more correct pronunciation of his name is, like Sandow going to the Mysore Palace, and then Mysore Palace where a lot of our like where Joyce, Toby Joyce, and Iyengar learning from Krishna Macharya, and there was a bodybuilding area, a bodybuilding room also. So people over in the West, they like to think we're doing some thousands of years old practice. This is what Indians were doing thousands of years ago, and isn't that spiritual? But not to say like Indians from 1,000 years ago didn't like bend over and touch their toes or do something like that, but a lot of the techniques, some of it seems to come from like Danish gymnastics. And is that true or what?
I only know from conversations with a very good friend of mine who's a very schooled yoga teacher, and he said that like you say, that at the late 1800s there was a merging with, I think he said Swedish gymnastics, but that's basically the same thing. Swedish is very close to Denmark. Was a merging of that gymnastics with one of the yoga styles. I don't recall which ones. And that, the very physical yoga. So there was a merging for sure. I think that's beyond any doubt.
Yeah, it seems to be put together pretty well. And of course, India goes way back and they have physical culture, but it does seem to be uh, very much influenced by the
Yeah.
West also. And that doesn't, it's not a bad thing.
No, not
In
at
fact,
all.
it's good for us to take
Yeah.
some of their ideas. There's nothing wrong with them taking like
Yeah.
in the West either. But I was just wondering if you had the experience in the Swedish gymnastics. Was that,
Yeah.
maybe I said something different?
You said Danish,
Oh, okay,
but
yeah.
I think that's like you can say you can consider that the same culture, the same type of movements. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've tried to find like the books from back then, but it seems to be kind of difficult to. I forget
The
name.
website that I'm familiar with is called superstrengthbooks.com
Okay.
by called Bill Himburn from the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. His catalogs and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you see as like next for what you're doing? Is there something like I told you, like the way I'm trying to like press my mind into thinking something a little bit different without trying to like reinvent the wheel? Is there something that you're like scratching at the edge of to figure out, or?
Yeah, many things. We really do what my company is called Yes to Strength. And our main thing is we teach personal trainers and strength coaches continuing education. And I work with athletes 1 or 2 at a time. And we say in a short way, we do 3 things. We operate at the level of the body. And our goal there is to help coaches deliver faster results through holistic, individualized, periodized programs. So we're scratching a lot on every new piece of research that comes out relating program design. Then, and as far as coaches, I really think this is the most important level, the mind, attitude of making the next session better and making the next program better. So it's basically having a protocol for learning from every session. And then the last thing is the spiritual side of it, which is maybe emotionally my biggest driver, which is kind of sort of using physical training to explore who we really are as human beings. So those are the 3 levels of training that I'm interested in. And by that, I can also say one thing that I think is important, but personally don't interest me that much, is technology. So I'm not going to say it's not, don't do it, or not important. It's just not something that I'm pulled towards. I'm a lot more pulled towards like energy work, Qigong, Tai Chi, those types of things, consciousness, refining consciousness to become as strong as possible, be as strong as possible.
Yeah, Qigong is an interesting one for me, and like some of the yoga stuff that I've done, and like I met my Qigong teacher. I hope nobody can hear that. Do you hear that lawnmower?
I hear a sound, but not too bad. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Hopefully they'll be quiet.
Yeah.
But anyways, so when I like, it's kind of like funny how we end up in different places, and so like I'm mentioned to you, I started as a personal trainer in 1999, and in 2001 I was an employee trainer at the most successful training studio in town in Indianapolis. And the owner was a real control freak. He wanted to even control my workouts.
All right.
And it was just insane. But I ended up quitting, and I started selling lawn care. And because I thought, well, in my mind, it was like, to be successful as a personal trainer, you kind of have to be mediocre. This was my experience at the time. And it wasn't what I thought was excellent that was doing very well. It was this, you go from this machine to that machine, and you go around, and they come in and they pay their money, and then they leave, and then it wasn't very, it was probably just where I was, and maybe it was the year and the time and me. But so I know there was like people training at a high level back then. I just But anyways, so I started selling lawn care, and I was just training people like friends and friends of friends. And I've been interested in Qigong for a long time, like wondering like what's real, like what is really real. And so I was so when I was selling lawn care, like the night before, we would get our estimates, like the people that called, they wanted their estimates for their fertilizer or whatever. And there was like maybe 5 or 6 salesmen at the time. And so I'm going through my stack, and I get this one, and I pick this one up, and like kind of like sends a shock through me. And it said Yang Xiao, XIOU. And I was like, oh, I'm going to ask him if he teaches Qigong.
Wow.
And I did estimates for hundreds of Chinese people. There's a lot of Chinese people in the area, Asian people, and I never had that cross my mind ever. But I was like, whoa, I'm going to ask him if he teaches Qigong. And so I get there, and the next day I go there, and it says Essence of China, Chinese Urban Acupuncture Clinic.
Wow.
It didn't say that on the estimate. It just had the name. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I have this thought. It like, does this little shock thing to me. So I ring the doorbell and knock on the door, because it's kind of like a house and a business in the same thing. And so nobody comes out. And normally on an estimate, you're trying to get like in and out as soon as possible. Time is money. The more I do, the more I can sell, the more money I make. But I'm like piddling around this yard, and I'm spinning forever. I'm like, man, I hope he comes out. And so I was about to leave, and I ring the doorbell again, and nobody comes. And I'm like, I'll just go ahead and leave. And so just when I'm like backing out of the driveway, I see, or pulling out of the driveway, I see in my rearview mirror him open the door. So I get out, and he didn't speak English. And so I'm like kind of like trying to like talk to him about the estimate, and he calls his son, and I talk to his son for a minute about the yard. And then I was like, do you teach Qigong? He's like, Qigong, Tai Chi. And he's just kind of like nodding his head, and I'm like, will you teach me Qigong? And he's like, Qigong, Tai Chi. So he calls his daughter, and it turns out that his daughter was the one that was the acupuncture and herbalist. And so I talked to her about Qigong, and I was like, can you teach me Qigong? And it's like, yeah. When do you want to start? And so for $10 an hour, I was getting private lessons.
Wow.
In Qigong, and they started teaching me Tai Chi, which I didn't really like it so much because it took a long time to not really, I didn't feel like I was catching on very well.
Okay.
But, and sometimes she was there to translate, because he didn't speak he spoke about as much English as I spoke Chinese. So I know some Chinese words. I'm sure I pronounced them wrong and all that.
Okay.
But anyways, I started like learning from him, and like a couple different sets, and one of them was like it's called Gong, and like it's a lot of like rubbing your face, like slapping down your arms and legs, and slapping down your chest, and then just kind of like shaking stuff. So like I'm standing up, and just like kind of like vibrating, and I thought that just that vibrating thing, just like kind of like a jumping motion without actually jumping, boosting up. I thought that was like the most powerful Qigong exercise that there is.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the one that I'll like still do, and I was doing it like after all my workouts, and people probably at the gym probably thought I was weird, just like doing. But anyways, like what's your like experience like with the Qigong? What are you doing with it, and what are your finding with it?
Well, I do those same exercises, slapping and shaking. We use those to teach someone about energy. So for example, sometimes you can try to talk to males about, so feel the energy in your arm. They just look at you weird, and they don't get it at all. So what we started to do in the workshops, we say, okay, pay attention to your arm. What does your arm feel like? And we do this with the whole body. And then now shake it and compare the feeling to before. Is there a difference? And I listen to what they say. And they often say something about tingling, heat, vibration. And they start to get an idea that the body is energy. And the reason we want to bring them to that is that the source of the body, and that's what's in our I Am Strong workshop that I mentioned, is called the 0 point field, which is a field of basically infinite energy. And the purpose of that workshop and energy work is to tap into more of that energy field. So that's why it's a good idea to have at least the concept, and to some extent also an experience of that, the body's energy. Second to that, the way we teach breathing for strength, we teach something we call the French press diaphragmatic breathing, which is basically about breathing into the lower dantian, the power center, and then trying to send the energy out from there, or bring the awareness out from there. Those are probably the two main ways that I do it. Then I personally do some organ breathing. I try to inhale into the organs and exhale out of the organs.
Is there a system that you think like resonates more clearly with you, like the organ breathing? I'm thinking of like Mantak Chia, and I'm thinking of, because like, you know, you read these like yoga books and these other things, and they'll say like, okay, your chakras, they're in the Sushumna. They're not the nerve plexuses. They're just in the spinal column, in the Sushumna. Another one says, well, they go into the nerve plexuses. They are related to this. Another one says, actually, it's just like psychological levels that we're talking about. So, and then there's like the Taoist system that talks more about the Dantians, like you're saying. So is there a system that is resonating more with you, that is already established, and that your own experience is just like that? Or are you finding your own thing that's a little bit of this, a little of that, or what's your...
I haven't studied it to the point that I can verbalize different names of systems. The book I've learned the most from is called The Way of Qigong by an American gentleman called Kenneth Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the book I've studied the most. I've had another good one that is similar called The Way to Shambhala, which basically covers the same topics. That's where I've learned the two sources I've learned the most from regarding that.
I'm
familiar with Mantak Chia also, and heard a lot of good things about him.
Yeah, he has a ton of material out. I mean,
yeah.
The books that he's written, and some of them, like, is this true? Is this real? Is he really? But some stuff, like my own experiences, and like there's definitely something to it. Like the microcosmic orbit, I can actually feel it.
Yes, same here.
And so I'm like skeptical, but I'm also not skeptical to the point where I'll disbelieve it just because I don't think it's true or something, if that makes any sense. It's like, you can tell, like my mind gets about as esoteric as it gets. I've had all kinds of wild experiences and esoteric experiences. And like you mentioned, the tapestry behind me, like I think it was before we started recording. So that's heart lotus. And so but anyways, so I have like all these strange experiences, but I'm also like, I don't believe just anything either, because it seems like a lot of this stuff, and like some of the yoga stuff, it's really hard to prove, and you have people teaching it that don't have the direct experience of it. And so when you have somebody, and maybe they're a yoga teacher, and they have their 200-hour certification, and they're talking about chakras that they have actually no direct experience with.
Yeah.
Like, how long has that been going on? And
I can comment on that. And I think and this is more like on a personal note, I listened a lot to Wayne Dyer when he was alive. American, you're familiar with him?
Yeah.
And he references an Indian guru of some sort, and I don't recall the name, who was asked, what is real? Now we talk about, is this real? And the answer was, that is real which never changes. And what is it that never changed? It's in that, you can say, in that line of reasoning, it's the I am present. It's the sense of being. Anything else in that sense is, if you stay with that, is not real. Those are more, you can say, options. And the second thing about that is, there's a guy called Ken Wilber talks about something like that, and David R. Hawkins talks about that, is that worldview, what seems to be real, depends on your level of consciousness, which means it's fair to imagine that, the way that any one of us see the world is based on just what level of consciousness we are at. Does that make sense? And, in 10 years, we might see things differently in 3 years. And the two more other things of that is Hawkins also talks about having direct experiences versus intellectualizing it. And if I do anything mental, spiritual, and I don't feel it right away, I tend to say, no, because it has to work now. It's not about being impatient. It's more about honoring that the now is all there is. So typically, if I can't feel a difference in my vibration, then I won't keep doing it. And then the last thing is from a guy called Bill Harris, who created HoloSync. He says, choose beliefs based on the consequences they will have for you, not based on whether you think they're true or not. Mm-hmm. So if you whatever we go with, if it makes sense to us and any one of us feel it moves us forward, we're free to go with it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And like when I practiced like the different kinds of yoga, and it like okay, so if you go to like a regular kind of like vinyasa class, like your typical yoga class, it's like whether you're not like chakras are real and the meridians and all that kind of stuff, even if that's not real, you're still working your body through different ranges of motion. Yeah, maybe some of the techniques are not good for you, extreme spinal twisting or something like that. But generally, you're taking your body through these different ranges, working your like strength in different ways, your mindful movement. So that's definitely good for you. And then when I was doing like some Kundalini yoga, and they want you to like just have your arms over your head for 15 minutes. Like, okay, do I really need to work my shoulder endurance like that? What is that really going to do anything for my Kundalini? Like, what is that? I mean, there's the mental strength of but is that, even if that's not real, so if Kundalini is not real, which I have felt it, but like, is that really the best use of my time to do these weird exercises? So like when you're connecting the Qigong to the like say like, are you connecting like to like the deadlifts? So are you, when you're doing something as fundamental as like deadlifts or squats, are you talking to your athletes about the Dantians or
I don't remember. I don't use those words. I talk about breathing into the power center. And then we typically, also inspired by Qigong, I don't talk about moving energy. I talk about moving awareness. Mm-hmm. So like rapidly move your awareness from your lower abdomen into your hips and legs and into the ground. I didn't make that up either. There's one of the best books ever on strength that I've read is called The Spiritual Journey of Joseph M. Greenstein. That was one of the ways that he was teaching his students the ability, and he used the visualization of an unstoppable force of water out through the arms and each individual finger. So it's a little bit inspired by that. So we use the principles, but I don't use esoteric words or anything.
Yeah, I haven't read that book, The Mighty Atom, right?
Yeah, The Mighty Atom.
Yeah, I haven't read that book. I've read about him, and that's a really amazing story, but I haven't had that book. It's really expensive, I think, to buy it.
It's not the cheapest book, no.
Yeah, but I had a buddy that told me about it a long time ago. I don't know how he got a hold of it, but I would like to read that for sure. Maybe there's
there's a lot of really cool mental stuff in it, and also a lot of interesting historical stuff. But the mental side, that's why I read it. How he was approaching training mentally, and in that I Am Strong course, there's a lot of quotes from the book. And he definitely he was Jewish, so he read all the ancient Jewish spiritual texts like the Torah, the Kabbalah, and that's what was, as far as it's described there, formed his mental approach to training.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Are there are there other instructors now who you're studying? Are you like, who are your like favorite people to study now, or do you find yourself looking like at the old timers, like the Mighty Atom more, or the current world record holders, like deadlift champions, and that? Or
it's mostly research. I read research articles, and that has to do with that I'm teaching trainers. So when I say, on what basis do I say that, I feel it's better to come from, I don't think it's irrelevant what the world record holder do by no stretch of the imagination, but it basically just takes up all my reading time to even try to stay on top of the research. It is.
And you're talking about like Pavel. So have you read the Plan Strong Endurance? Are you?
No, I might get that one.
Yeah, I think as of now it's just the workshops.
Yeah. Okay.
But, I had Fabio Zonin on a couple weeks ago, or last week, something like that.
Yeah.
And he said that it sounds like it's going to come out as a book by the end of this year. Pavel has a book coming out. I think it's the Strong Endurance book, and I haven't been to one of those, but from what I understand, it's super scientific. A lot of just cutting edge research, and very complicated, and you have to it's as mentally challenging to get through this this material. And I will probably go to one of these things, or both of them, because I'm planning on my Strong First level 2 kettlebell certification in April. I'll turn 40 years old April 27th, and that's and I'll be there. I'll be getting my level 2 that day.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it should be cool. Yeah, I did my level 1, just over 3 years ago, and I recertified level 1, but I kind of wished I did level 2, and so it'll be interesting to both turn 40.
I think in terms of who to learn from or to follow, some of you can say that the general principles on that is when someone is yours. I'm 49. When someone has been in a field as long as we have, where we like learning, we're taught that you should be learning. You can go either in the direction where you think I think I know everything, which is not good, obviously. And then there's the other direction where you keep reading a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not really using what you're reading. And then there's something in between where you say, okay, if I applied everything that I know in a systematic fashion, how successful would I be? And it's somewhere, between learning a lot and really focusing on applying what I know right now. I think that's a good place where you want to be. Second, and this is a comment mostly to if there are any coaches or trainers listening, in these days of social media, a lot of trainers talk about, I follow so-and-so. With that being said, it's important to be mindful of that being a trainer and coach is a job of leading, which means that you might follow someone on social media. When you do your job, you have to have the mindset of a leader. And the last aspect of it is that I think you do that, you learn from everyone, but follow no one. I don't know who said that, but that's a good quote.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that I apply that so I teach a martial arts class. I don't try to present myself as the best. I know people that are better, but I think I have a really good way of teaching people, and that's same thing with the training. So yeah, I'm the only certification that I have is Strong First.
Okay.
There's other ones that kind of sound good sometimes, and I'll look at what Ido Portal is doing. And I'm like, oh, he's got some cool stuff. And I'm looking at these different things that seem really neat, but a lot of times I don't invest. I don't put all of my money in that, because I'm trying to figure out what's next, and like something like obscure, like the clean and press. Everybody knows the clean and press, but like maybe there's like something in the mind, or that I can apply this mindset to martial arts, or I can apply this energy system in a way, or so I'm always trying to like develop my own system. And like my kettlebells, yeah, I'm certified by Strong First, but I call what I do freestyle kettlebell training.
Okay.
And so I kind of have that in as a way to sometimes it might look like more like sport style, or I do juggling and all kinds of different stuff.
Cool.
So I try to do that same mindset that you're talking about, just leading. But yeah, I'm also not thinking that like I'm not like leading, thinking that I'm the best at everything. But I'm good enough to lead, and I'm also not so good that I can't learn from a lot of different people. So it's like just finding these interesting like little things to like pick from, like the Bruce Lee, pick what is keep what's useful and discard the rest. And then I added myself, and then revisit that discarded pile.
Yeah.
Because there's things I might have thought, oh, that's ridiculous, I'm putting that in the discard pile. And then a few years later, I'm like, actually, that's cool. I just didn't understand at the time.
Yeah.
Now I'm at a level where I can understand that maybe that shouldn't have been discarded. Now is the time to use that. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, on the note of being the best, there's some very interesting views on that. Is you can say for the longest time, the thought of, let's say, being the best strength coach in the world. I would say, first of all, there's no competition for that. There's no way of really clarifying who is the best strength coach in the world. And second, if someone thought that, it would be like an ego-based way of thinking. I want to be better than someone else. So I kind of say, I'm not going to go there. Then I watched a guy called David Goggins on YouTube. You came across that name. So he said, and it made me think a lot. He said, I want to be the fittest person ever on this planet. I said, am I that? I don't care. And it made me think of, you can say, if you believe that, each of us are here to make a unique contribution to life on this planet, whatever that is. And if the field we participate in is supposed to move forward, has to be the best ever. So it's really not about being better than other people. It's about advancing life, the field that you are involved with. And you don't have to say it to anyone that I am the best, or I want to be the best, but internally we can say, what would it take to be the best in the world? What would it take to be the best martial arts instructor ever? How would I think if I was the best martial arts instructor ever? Which books would I read? How would I speak to my students? And really try to get into that.
Yeah, it's hard to say, like, who is the best, and like a lot of the great coaches are maybe not the best players, or the it gets the ego thing, like, because like to get in front of somebody, and it can be kind of intimidating, and it's like, how do you take that? So like in my case, I was 20 years old, hated school, had no interest in going to college. And then I have clients that are heart surgeon. So there I am, and then there he is, and I'm teaching him. And so it's you have to like become that way. You have to like be good enough. So that made me want to really know my stuff even more and more. And he didn't, and then to get to the realization that he doesn't expect me to know more about heart surgery than him.
No.
He expects me to be excellent at what we're there for, which is strength and conditioning stuff. And so I'm not trying to like outsmart him. I'm not there to outsmart him in those kind of ways. I don't want to get in a anatomy discussion with him or an anatomy competition.
No.
So it's like learning, what can we be excellent at, and if it's
Yeah.
strength and conditioning stuff, then who's out there doing it. And it seems like there's a lot of not to put down what anybody's doing, but there's a lot of stuff that's like mediocre. There's like so many certifications now, and what I like about
Yeah.
Strong First is I believe it's like excellent. So are there other ways to lift the kettlebell, like kettlebell sport? Yeah, that's a different thing. They have a different purpose, but it's excellent. And then, but it seems like there's a lot of stuff that's just trendy, and it almost like some of it almost becomes like a caricature of itself. People will have like maybe like
Yeah.
a nickname they're trying to live up to, or some kind of like cartoon character almost that they're trying to be, and
Yeah.
it's
That's one of the things that I think is incredibly important, is that fitness and training is sometimes treated like fashion, partly because a lot of us think we're involved in an industry. An industry has to come up with new things, especially the people that produce equipment and sometimes also educations. And trainers like us, we start to focus on what's new, which is not the right question. The right question is to focus on, like, what do I need to learn to take my clients to the next level?
yeah.
Yeah, so it's a huge mistake. And what you spoke about before relates to some of the definitions of an expert. Where have you heard a guy called Matt Fury?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in one of his writings, he wrote that an expert is someone who knows more than the person he's talking to. And that's a good reminder for a really new trainer who lacks a little bit of confidence to get out there and speak to the clients, is that because you know more about training than the client, you are the expert.
Yeah, and I was listening to it was a couple guys that were mainly focused on nutrition, but like one of them was bodybuilder, competitive power lifter, and it was on the Joe Rogan podcast very recently, just last week. I can't remember the guys' names, but they were so Rogan had two guys on to have maybe not so much of a debate, but like a different points of view kind of thing, because they agreed about most things. Like one thing one of the guys kept saying is, let's not lose the 95% arguing about 5%. So him and the other guy, they agree about 95% of the information. Like, we agree on almost everything. And here's some where we differ. But let's not just argue about this 5%. Let's talk about the 95% that we agree on. So when, as trainers, like what I'm doing is not trying to put all these like obscure ideas that I'm working on into place as the complete workout. So yeah, we can do like the clean and press, but I'm not necessarily like getting into the weeds of my thinking on what this might do besides get you stronger. It's a pull and a push at the, and I'm not doing very much inventing. There's like maybe a little bit of innovation going on but for the most part, I'm not inventing these exercises. I'm not inventing a brand new way to deadlift or a brand new way to press and we're making things unnecessarily complicated. And it seems like maybe people are spending too much time as trainers on this like obscure stuff that doesn't really get much results, or it gets results at first. Like, you can do almost anything with a client. New client comes to you, they're sedentary, they're overweight. Almost any trainer will do for a while.
Yeah.
And
I agree. Mel Siff is quoted to say that any idiot can train another idiot for a year.
yeah.
And that's like a little offensive way to say what you were saying. Respond easily early on in a training career. I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Now, one of the things that has been very useful for me is which I learned from my father, is that no one is 100% right and no one is 100% wrong. So when I hear opposing viewpoints, I try to find out basically like a 4-quadrant thing, like if one person what's right about what he says, and you can say what might not be fully right, and vice versa for the other one. And that has really helped my toolbox grow a lot on that note, because I learned when is a deadlift a good exercise, when might it not be a good exercise. We try to take an unbiased approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess we've been on for about an hour 15 into it. Did you have anything else you're wanting to cover before I let you go?
No, not particularly. I think if it's been good for you listeners, I am happy. I mean, our website overall is yes2strength.com. We are out of Canada. Our products are mostly geared for someone who is a trainer, coach or trainer, or has similar knowledge and interests. We have a mind-body specialist program available live and online, a barbell training specialist program available live and online, bodyweight training specialist program live or online, and a program design specialist program live and online. And the program design specialist is divided in 3. If you work mostly with clients that want changes in body composition, that's one stream. If you work with recreational athletes, there's another, a little bit of longer stream. And if you work with competitive athletes, a little bit of a longer stream. And the core is the flexible periodization method, which is, you can say in the shortest way of saying it, it is a tool for exploring who you really are through physical training.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig more into your methods, and I'll certainly be doing that. And yeah, I can tell pretty much right away. This is the first time we've spoke, besides a few messages for scheduling, and I can tell right away you have a lot of good information to share, a lot of good experience that's been proven at the highest level. So I really appreciate you coming on. And is there anything else you want any final thoughts for the listeners?
No, thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure speaking with you. I like the flow of the conversation, that we covered different things.
Yeah, me too. Thanks
you
for coming on, and I'd be happy to have you on again for sure. And
likewise.
I will. I'll go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll talk to you for just a second after I hit.
Yeah.